All right. Thank you all for your patience. The FCT&L is a happening place today. And so there was only one person that was going to be in person. And we just decided that it would be easier to do it all on Zoom instead of spending our time doing the hybrid option. So that's what we've been doing. And the plus is that I wasn't sure I was going to have enough to say anyway. So us running a little bit late will take up a few minutes of our time. So I'm gonna get started and I'm gonna share a PowerPoint if I can. And I will just say if somebody's gonna mess up technology, it's gonna be me. So bear with me. All right. Are you all able to see that PowerPoint? Okay, I got a thumbs up from Alex. Thank you. Okay, so previously we had our relationship rich series 1 for the certificate, and we talked about just the components of relationship rich pedagogy and kind of where the most recent information came from. And a lot of this again falls from the Relationship Rich Education book by Peter Felton and Lambert. Since then, I have tried to actually look up some articles and research about relationship rich education just to see what else is out there. And there's really not a lot, but there is a bit of actual research published about relational teaching. There's also relational leadership, which seems to be a little more prevalent in the literature, but follows many of the same theories and strategies as relational teaching follows, and about in a leadership scenario, the importance of building those connections between people and the effectiveness of that. So all of this it's kind of gaining a little bit of steam. People are getting a little more interested in it, but there's already some standing evidence to support it. So I just kind of wanted to share that with you all because that's something new that I did since we have seen each other last time. All right, so here is the book and the link to the website, Peter Felton and Lambert's website, if you want any more information about it, or if you want to dive in any deeper. So what did you all think? And I'm going to put a lot of this back on you also. Hopefully, maybe you're ready to talk this morning. How did you all feel after you left last time? Did you think that the information was useful and I guess applicable as well? Or did you just leave and think, well, that was interesting, and then felt like once you tried to implement it, it wasn't very applicable? What are your all kind of thoughts?
Casey, I can chime in. Honestly, I had kind of forgotten about it because I got in a swing of a few weeks of things going really well. There were a few amount of students that, were missing class or missing assignments. And so I felt like everything was good and dandy. And then we hit this time where everybody across the board sees an increase in missed attendance, missed assignments. And so on these times when I'm just like, I got to get through the semester and finish it, instead leaning on this reminds me I will see these students again next semester. So instead of just trying to push through to finish, I'm leaning back on the information from this book and saying, hey, let's start now. Let's address what we need to this semester. So that way, hopefully next semester, we're not in the same predicament of, seeing student attendance or assignments die off.
Yeah, great point, Annette. And I think you bring apart a good kind of that relentless welcome that is every student must experience a genuine welcome, which is one of the principles, is that we have to be careful about getting so caught up in the task that we neglect to create a welcoming environment, because you may get the task completed this semester, but just like to your point, the next semester when you see them, you're already starting out on a kind of a bad foot, where that kind of connection has already been damaged. And so relationship-rich education is definitely not about decreasing rigor or decreasing expectations, but it's about being careful to make sure that we're not damaging connections in the process of implementing that rigor and those expectations, and that we're doing things intentionally to make sure that we are creating a relationship that when we do have high expectations, students are more willing to put themselves out there and work towards those expectations. So yeah, awesome. Great example. Anything else that anyone thought from the last time that we met?
Yeah, in one of my classes, I thought a lot about this, and for my online classes that have 150 students, I still am sort of at a loss for implementing any of this. But for my in-person classes, for the last point, every student must explore questions of meaning and purpose. I teach a class called Sensation and Perception. It's about how sensory systems work in our body, eyes, ears, stuff like that. It's for psychology majors, though, and most of them don't really expect to study anything so technical. So for their, but it's important, I think, especially for psychology majors, to understand how our brains get information in the first place. So for the final project, I used to have them do pretty standard sort of review of the scientific literature and write an APA format paper, that kind of thing. And this semester, I decided to open it up so that they could write a paper if they wanted to, but I also gave them the option of doing something creative. I noticed I had a lot of students who were, they like to draw, they were doodling, and some of them seemed to be really into music. So I thought, well, they could draw something or create a piece of music, and then but they could do so based on some of the principles that we had talked about in class, about how we perceive shapes, how we perceive objects, how music perception works and stuff like that. I don't know how good the projects are going to be yet, but the students seemed, at first they were a little bit confused. But as we started talking about it throughout the semester, a few of them have gotten really excited about what they're doing, which is nice for me, because typically students in the past have had trouble understanding, why are we learning about hair cells in the ear? We're psychology majors, and so by doing this, I'm hoping it will give them that meaning, give them that purpose, because they can kind of insert whatever they want, basically. And so yeah, that's where I've gone with it in that class.
I love that. That's a great example of the every student must be inspired to learn principle. And I think that you give a great example of how sometimes the content itself can be, I don't know if off-putting is the right word, but unexpected, or maybe not naturally draw people in, but it's still important information that they have to know within the discipline. And so you almost have to envision the content in a different way to get that buy-in. And for students that must be inspired to learn within that principle, some of the things they talk about are providing an appropriate challenge for the students or connecting content back to personal things that the students enjoy. And I think you did that exactly, is that you re-envisioned it in a way that the students could connect their own things that they enjoyed back to the content. So yeah, that's a great example. I like that you brought up some of the challenges, and we'll talk a little bit more about the challenges we faced, but that the students were kind of like confused about like, why am I doing this? And I think you kind of get that a little bit if you set up your class differently than maybe what they've experienced before, or something's unexpected. They don't just, they've had all the way since kindergarten of a certain expectation for what education looks like. And so when you kind of twist it a little bit, they are a little confused and they're like, what's this person doing? But I like that once they got into it, it sounds like they're kind of enjoying themselves. It'll be nice to see what comes of it at the end. So cool idea. How big are these classes, the in-person? Because you said the large classes were more challenging, but are these more like 20 students or
Yeah,
like more
it's like 25. Although on some days only 10 people show up. It's like if it's raining, people just don't come out. It was cold the other day, and yeah, about 10 people were there. We'll see how many people show up on Monday. Although I promised food on Monday because we're talking about the gustatory system. So it's a perfect timing for that. So I don't know if the draw of food is gonna make a difference, but
in fairness, I might skip class if it was raining too. You never know. Okay, awesome. That's great. So it sounds like you all have at least given this some thought, maybe implemented some of the strategies. So just as a review, the 4 main principles, and this is really what the entire book talks about. So it talks about the relationship principles in the first couple of chapters, and then it really breaks up those principles and talks about them throughout the chapters. But that every student must experience a genuine welcome and deep care. Every student must be inspired to learn. Every student must develop a web of significant relationships, and every student must explore questions of meaning and purpose. And just like many like theories and pedagogies, they all overlap with one another. So it's going to be really hard to inspire someone to learn if you're not providing an environment of welcome and deep care. So they really sometimes we'll say pick a principle, or when we were in the PLC, we did this. We pick a principle and then see if you can implement something under that principle. But ultimately, they could fall under multiple principles, just kind of like anything does. It's not incredibly straightforward, but as a whole, these are really the things that kind of drive at least Felton and Lambert's understanding of relationship-rich pedagogy. So we've talked about this already. What strategies have you implemented? Alex shared. I can kind of start by sharing one thing that I have done this semester is I teach, all my students are on level 2 fieldwork, and they're all out in facilities all across the United States. And so I do site visits, and it's just easier to do them on Zoom. It's so much easier to not have to drive to Bowling Green and visit a student when I can Zoom with the student and their educator. But since COVID, I feel like we've really fallen into that as the go-to because it's easier, but maybe not necessarily always the most appropriate for the situation. And so this semester, I had a smaller group than normal. So I wanted to really challenge myself to not just fall back into that because it was easier. If it was appropriate and the only option, then of course Zoom was great. But if there was the opportunity and it was more appropriate to go in person, I wanted to try to do that. And so I visited about half of my students. I have 22 out at fieldwork right now, and I visited about half of them in person at their sites. And during that time, I was just able to talk to them more about their experience at fieldwork, but also they would share more about like what they were doing while they were living in a different town, or the relationships they had built with the people at their facility. Or I could kind of see the student and maybe their on-site educator kind of banter and joke back and forth a little bit and be a part of that. And so I really feel like with this group, I have a much better understanding of what they need and what their experiences are and how I can support them because I did those in-person visits. And when I think about what strategy that would fall under, I would probably put it really under, welcome and deep care. But really, it could fall under a number of them. But another one would be a web of significant relationships and developing those relationships with people outside of EKU, so that when students go back to those places in the future, there's better relationships and it sets the ground for those future students. So that's something that I tried to do that was relational driven this semester. Is there anything else or anything that you all really implemented and tried that worked, or things that didn't work? Did anybody try anything that didn't work as well? Nothing. Does anybody have any potential ideas about things that they didn't get to implement but they might want to?
So Casey, I'll share something. It's more along the lines of like we did it this semester, and then we'll probably try to continue going forward. I know the Career Center does a lot of things for students, and we do things in the College of Health Sciences, but we hosted our own program's own networking event and had food and like a speed networking type event where our upcoming students could meet internship preceptors. The internship process is overwhelming, and although we have a list and they have guidance throughout the process, that is their biggest stressor when they get to the end point of the curriculum. And we got such great feedback from both our agencies and our students. I'm going to try, if I can, as coordinator, to do it every semester, especially for our larger internship cohorts. I think at first the students were really hesitant. And then I think afterwards they really saw the value in the networking experience. And so it was kind of helping to build those web of relationships that will be instrumental to them as they transition from student and then public health practitioner in the field.
Yeah, definitely. That is a great example of building those webs of significant relationships. In the book, it talks about, it kind of pounds this idea that we have to have relationships with every student and that we have to learn all their names and we have to know everything about them. And that's how to do this. But that's not really realistic. It's just not a possibility, especially when you're teaching a large number of students. So that's really where that web of significant relationships comes in, is that the expectation is not necessarily that we have relationships with all of these students, but that there is an opportunity that the students are able to build a relationship with somebody, and that we're kind of helping to drive a culture to where that happens. Because the book says, actually, I don't think it's this book. I think it was another book that I read that said a student only has to have a relationship with one person at the institution to continue and maybe not drop out or finish their degree. Just one person is all. And so that, I feel like that takes the burden off of us when we're thinking about this. To me, I'm trying. I'm definitely trying, but I can't do it all. And that, I don't think that's what this is asking us to do. So I think Laurel's example is really a nice one of here's an event, we can host this event, and that's going to set the stage for the students to have these relationships and then set them on a right foot moving forward, decrease that anxiety for them, help them know who they're going to go out and be with and that kind of thing. So I think that's a great example. We do something similar in the occupational therapy department. We're actually having it tomorrow. We call it Research Day, and our students present research projects that they've done. It's very similar to what you would see at Scholars Day and those type of things, but we do it specifically as a thank you to our fieldwork educators, our on-site supervisors that are out in the clinics. And we invite them, and they get continuing education for their OT licensure to participate. But really what it is it's a networking event. It showcases our students, but it allows our students to meet these clinicians that are out in the community that they're going to be working in less than a year. And so they can build those relationships. Sometimes their actual on-site supervisor of where they will be going for their internship will be there. So similar situation, they can talk, reduce that anxiety, and it is a really good opportunity for the students to build those relationships with people outside of EKU as well. Thank you for sharing. All right. Can anyone in the process of moving? I have lost my phone, and so I have no idea what time it is. So I found it. Here we go. All right, we're about 10:30. Just wanted to make sure I was not over talking. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to do after you all shared was to share pilot programs or projects that I'm familiar with that have happened here at EKU, and maybe some successes and struggles that those people have had implementing those pilots. So before this certificate program, we ran 2 PLCs. Actually, there might have been 3 PLCs that we did as part of this. I guess I went through 1, and then maybe I've run 2 more. And so one of the things, those PLCs would meet throughout a semester multiple times, and everyone would try to implement some sort of pilot project related to relationship-rich education. And then pedagogicon, last year, the focus was relationship-rich education. And so I want to make sure that I am not giving the impression that the expectation are these big projects. And so I wanted to share some of the smaller things. And I think I shared a few in our last meeting, but some of the smaller things that people are doing across campus to moving the dial towards more relationship-rich pedagogy. So the first one, every student must experience genuine welcome and deep care. And in the book, there is this idea of the relentless welcome is what they call it. And I think, we all are like, of course we're welcoming. Like, people come in and they say good morning, and but in the book it's more of this, it never stops. It's what we want to do and how welcoming we want to be on the first day is how welcoming we're going to be on the last day. And so it's this idea of just continually being as welcoming, the relentless welcome as we possibly can, to make the students know that they are in a place where they're welcome and cared for. And students don't often accept it, or my experience, they don't often accept it the first time. I can feel like I'm being very welcoming and have an open door policy, and it may take me many times to interact with a student before I feel like they actually see me as someone that's welcoming to come and talk with. And I don't think I'm an off-putting person. Like, I'm not intimidating. I'm not intimidating in stature. I'm not intimidating in what I say. Like, I'm not an intimidating person at all. But I just think that when a student in that power differential, it's kind of instantly intimidating no matter what. And so you have to kind of work at it, I think. But a couple of the strategies that they talk about in the book is that just an open door policy, spending time before and after class of availability to talk with the students, learning the students' names. That's definitely hard in a large class for sure, but as many as possible. So a couple of pilots that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there are many, many more. But Dr. Swain in political science, he teaches gen ed larger classes, and I may have shared this one already, so I'm sorry to kind of repeat, but it was hard for me to remember what I talked about. I can get on a train and just keep going and have no idea what I said. But he actually took time at the end of class, so he shortened his class by like 10 or 15 minutes, and then would meet with 3 to 5 students at the end of class. And the meeting was not to talk about class, it was to talk about how's your experience. So these are mostly freshman students, and he wanted to meet with them, like, how's your semester going? What are you struggling with? Do you have everything that you need? Do you know where the library is? Do you know where, do you have food to eat? Do you know where student health is? Those type of things that you would expect more to get in one of their orientation classes, and they likely were getting them in their orientation classes and things like that. But he just really wanted to make sure that he got to know the students on more of a personal level. And we actually did collect data from this, and the students gave good feedback about the individual meetings, and he saw a decline in his drop-fail withdrawal rates from that class as well. So I thought that was interesting. Shirley O'Brien in occupational therapy, and also Nadeem, who I don't know what department he's in anymore. They teach a lot of online classes, and so they, in a previous PLC, we talked about how to build those relationship rich strategies within online classes, because that's more of a challenge. And Shirley does this thing called Shirley shout outs, and Nadeem did something similar, to where there's no way that you can recognize all the students. There's way too many, but they would choose 3 or 4, and in their lecture every week, they would identify those students and say, oh, Casey posted something really interesting on the discussion board this week. You should go check it out. Or Annette had this great resource. I want to share it with you all. Things like that, and tried to do, 3 or 4. And they didn't necessarily get through the whole class, But it was one of those things where the students knew that the instructor was recognizing them and recognizing their work, and there was a possibility that they were going to be recognized week after week. And they kept track of who they recognized, so they weren't recognizing the same person over and over. And Shirley kind of brought up that she would try to recognize maybe students that she felt were less engaged in the class, and so that to pull them back in if she saw someone kind of falling off, recognizing them, and it was really just like a 30-second shout out to 3 to 5 students every week. In every student being inspired to learn. In the book, the strategies are sharing personal stories, talking about transparency, and sharing the why. And so I know that I'm guessing you all are familiar with the TILT pedagogy, the transparency in teaching and learning, that kind of EKU. I'm seeing a few head nods. So transparency, yes, in the format of the assignment is beneficial, but also transparency in students understanding why you're teaching what you're teaching, and that it's not just a hoop that they have to jump through. So Alex, I think that you've kind of brought that up about your class. It's like, I'm a psychology major. Why do I need to learn this? Why is it important? And you're really trying to make an effort to connect that back to, well, this is why it's important, because you need it for these reasons, and it's applicable in these other things that you also enjoy as well. And like bringing the food, I mean, it's a perfect example. And so I think that piece of transparency definitely falls under the inspired to learn. A couple of things that I've heard about are the guest lecturers, having people come in from the community to lecture that may be an expert in an area to demonstrate the applicability of the content for the students. Many ungraded concepts kind of fall under inspired to learn. I know, we've got faculty here that really like the ungraded classes, because that just kind of creates more of an environment for students to really push themselves and do more things that they feel are applicable to themselves. I shared my example last time about using current events and case studies of individuals in our community that have had brain injuries and their recovery process. Since I was teaching a class about brain injury, that would fall under inspired to learn. Every student must develop a web of significant relationships. We've talked a lot about this already. A lot of mentorship programs, creating environments for students to meet people outside of EKU, taking campus tours as part of classes, where, you don't just talk about like use the library, but you actually take students over to the library, let them meet a librarian so that they have a relationship with that institute within the campus, and it's not just an obscure idea. A couple of things that I've heard that are going on is Jose Juan Becerra in the Spanish program. They were working on kind of I'm not sure that I am going to describe it completely accurately, but students who are coming out of high school and are new here, that they have a connection with the Latina population here on campus and have the supports that they need to be successful. And then the College of Health Science did something similar but different with their Inspire program over the summer, and they took students who had scored low in math and were going to have to take the math remediation or support courses coming out of high school. And they brought them onto campus and gave them resources in the STEM center, tutoring resources to try to get them on the right foot to enter into these math courses that their high school scores had demonstrated that they might have challenges with. And so when these students show up here, they know what resources are available. They're familiar with the people on campus. They had mentors within the College of Health Sciences, so they knew someone that they could reach out to. And so those are a few things that I'm familiar with. And those are institution-based examples. So when you think about your class, you're like, well, I'm not going to run one of those in my class, right? So that how does that apply to me? But knowing about the programs and knowing about those resources is a great way that we can kind of facilitate and say, hey, we know this program is happening, and we think this student would be beneficial, and hooking those students up with the things that they need. We can do that. And then finally, every student exploring questions of meaning and purpose. And I think that in my mind, I think of like a movie where the professor is at like Harvard or Yale, and they're all sitting in a library and talking about the life and philosophical questions. That's what I think of when I think of this. But basically, how students can have the opportunity to explore kind of who they are and the bigger questions of life related back to their discipline. And so just creating a space for discussion in a classroom is one of the concepts that fall under this. Again, I think ungrading concepts can fall under this as well, because it allows students to challenge their thinking without worrying about their grade. And then the one example that I really thought of are programs that have maybe capstones or theses, having those mentors. I mentor a couple of capstone students, and being able to kind of that deeper meaning and purpose when they're doing research and doing these capstones on their own. And what does that mean? And what does that mean to you? I think are examples that would fall under this kind of section. Do you all agree, disagree, think of anything else that you know that is going on here on campus that are really good examples of any of these?
I can talk about that creating classroom space for discussion. This isn't something new. This is something I've been doing in intro psych. I'm not teaching in-person intro psych this semester, but I am next. But every Thursday, every week, I divide the class in half. And so half come at the beginning of class, half come at the end. And that's so we can have discussion. And I give them a list of questions to answer. It's the same list every week. It's things like, what did you find most interesting? What was most surprising? What was most useful? What's related? Just pretty broad, generic questions. And they just have to answer one. And then they come to class and we just talk about it. What the chapter made them think about. And I never know where the discussions are going to go. And the students seem to like it, of course. To them, it's just like hanging out. I do try to be very casual about it. But when I first started doing it after reading some research in psycholinguistics on how people create common ground, and some of the research suggests that a face-to-face conversation, one or two people really is much better for that. So I thought, let's try to implement that. And so I did. But then I also kept track of their performance on quizzes and exams. And in the sections where I introduced this day, where basically we didn't go over content. I mean, I had to cut a lot of lecture to do this, but their performance actually went up. on the assessments. So I've just kept doing it. Of course, the pandemic sort of threw a wrench in all of it. But I'm teaching one section of intro psych next semester, and I'm looking forward to doing that again. I've really enjoyed doing it myself. The students are doing better. So yeah, I'm glad to see that it's in the book. Actually, that the fact that I'm doing that was I've been doing, that was one of the reasons I wanted to sign up for this session, just to see if I had sort of been on the right track with that. So I definitely agree with that place for discussion. I think people get so much out of that. And I also sort of had this idea of, people sitting, from at prestigious universities sitting in, fancy libraries talking about big questions of the universe. And I kind of want to try to recreate that to the extent that I can, because I think that's a nice ideal for a university. And we run into reality, of course, and can't do that all the time. But if I can create a little space, every Thursday from 10 to 11:15 or whatever, then I'm going to do it. So
yeah, I love that. And I always say the people that come to these, like the people that came to my PLC, are the people that are already doing relationship rich strategies, and maybe they just don't define it as such, but certainly are. And that's what I'm seeing with this group, that sometimes I wonder, like, maybe the people who need to be here are not the ones that are here, right? But that's a great example of how it's probably not super effortful for you to talk about a content that you're knowledgeable about, but it is effortful in the sense that it's intentional, that you do have to schedule that and that you have to cut other content out. But I do think you said it's not really new, and it's new in the sense maybe that you've been doing it for a while, but I think in the big scheme of things, it is new and it is innovative thinking on your part, because I took lots of psychology classes. I have a psychology minor from EKU, and that certainly wasn't what they were doing when I was in school, which it's been many years ago. But my point being, you do have to kind of pave a new path to do things like that. So awesome. And I love hearing that they're doing better on their tests too. Or on their assessments, because that may be something that you don't expect. You might say, well, they'll probably like it more, but the fact that they're also doing better is super cool. Thank you for sharing.
Something that I'm doing in my class, I teach over in the interpreting department, the American Sign Language and English interpreting department. And our classes we're in a cohort model. So every 2 years we take students and they go through the program, go on internship, graduate, and then we accept the next batch. And so the classes, their junior year, their first year in the program, is very much the theory behind interpreting, the frameworks of interpreting. So they're kind of learning the nuts and bolts of the process. And then their senior year, they're learning really how to, the spring of their junior year, and then senior year, really learning how to apply that information. And so it's been really cool to see the connections that the students have made, because last year it was like, oh, why are we reading this book? Why are we having to discuss like how people communicate and the goals behind communication? But now that they're actually interpreting, it's really cool for them to see the connection. It's like, see, like last fall, you were wondering, why are we doing this? This is why we were doing that, is so that you knew how to identify these goals between speakers and things. And I'm still a practitioner in the field. I still interpret pretty actively. And so being able to share my personal experiences in the field and tie it to class content has been, I think, really beneficial for buy-in. So students are like, oh, this is stuff I'm actually going to use later. It's not just something that we have to learn right now, or we have to learn for a test. Like I've been able to share with them, these ethical situations came up while I was interpreting. This is how I approached it. This is maybe how I would do it differently in the future. So kind of giving them something to latch on to with these course concepts, I think has been really beneficial for students. And something that I'm working with other interpreters on is developing these mentor relationships a little bit sooner, instead of waiting till their senior year, when they're meeting internship sites and then going on internship sites in the spring, maybe starting those relationships in their junior year that fall, just so they can have kind of that web of connection in the community. So it's not just to EKU, but they can go to other working interpreters and be like, hey, we're learning about, this ethical situation in class. I don't know why we have to read this book. Why is it important? And to have that perspective of a working interpreter being like, oh no, like, I promise you'll use this and this is why, I think would be hopefully really effective. So that's what I'm going to try to work on for the next cohort that's coming in next fall.
I love that. I think that's such a great idea. And I completely agree with you. When they know that someone's working in the field, that's what they crave, right? That's what they're like, I'm doing all this so that I can go and work in the field. We get our students in occupational therapy, they'll go out to like a clinic, and sometimes they'll come back and we'll hear like, well, there wasn't an occupational therapist. We didn't get to see an occupational therapist. And I'm like, I mean, like, I'm one. like we have some of the best ones, licensed occupational therapists that are the ones taking you to the sites. But for whatever reason, we're not clinicians, right? We're academics now. And so I always kind of get a kick. I'm like, well, I mean, you saw me every day. Like, what am I, just like chopped liver? They crave that. So I think that's such a great thing to do, is bring in your own experiences, and then the building those relationships. They'll absolutely love that, and it'll be hugely beneficial. So good luck to you on that, for sure. All right, so we have just a few more minutes, but one of the things I really wanted to talk about was the challenges, and then also we talked about some of these, so I'm going to skip ahead. But not only what are the barriers to doing this, but also what are the like, how are you getting credit for it? Nobody wants to say do extra work, try harder, and then not be recognized for it. And so every time I talk about this, I really like to end on what's the benefit to the faculty? How can you really toot your own horn about what you're doing? Because these things are important. The research says that they're helping students, but our current evaluation systems, as far as like P&T goes, don't necessarily reflect that that's important. And so how can we, I just wanted to have a conversation about that. Do you all see ways that we can, help to identify this a little more and get credit for the hard work that we're doing? Any thoughts on that?
Full disclosure, this is my first year on the tenure track, so I'm getting ready to write my narrative for how this works. So I'm not sure that this is going to be effective, but something that I'm thinking of is using the book that we've read, that this information is based off of, and tying that into my narrative that I draft for my evaluation, trying to highlight, like, this is how I'm using this research to support my teaching in this way. So hopefully, like, maybe laying that out for people like on the P&T committee that are reading through that. And then likewise, those that are, I think there's an award coming up, faculty teaching awards. Like, there's one this year focused on this. So this might be a good way for people to fill out an application and actually think about the ways that they're being really innovative in this area, and hopefully get recognized for it.
Yeah, exactly. You brought all the points that I was going to bring forward. And I think the biggest one is that using the book to build language into what we're doing. We're not just being nice. It's a pedagogy, it's a teaching approach, and it should be recognized. And so using that language, I think, is a big takeaway that I want people to have.
I forgot to just follow up. You mentioned you're just on the tenure track. I'm already promoted to full professor, and in my application for a full professor, this was years ago, I don't even remember the year. but I had written about the little class discussion activity. That's what that was my teaching narrative, writing about that experiment and how it benefited students. And well, they promoted me. The issue with doing it there is those materials are confidential, so they'll never leave the committee. Now I sit on the committee, where we evaluate these things, and we're not allowed to talk about them outside of the, and so yeah, great, do that. But you said there's a teaching award or something. Yeah, I was unaware of that. That's probably a better way to sort of get the word out to everybody, rather than sort of this secretive group of professors who meet to evaluate, non-tenured faculty. So.
I wanted to share one of the things that we're doing, and it's not like an official P&T thing, but I know that some people are keeping the documentation to go in their P&T. We started an initiative, a pilot last year, Thank a Professor. And last year we received 100 students, and basically we sent out the request, we created a form, and students were able to thank their professors for something. And they were usually areas of kindness, mentoring, compassion. There's like 5 different areas, and a lot of them, they're very relationship rich. This year we had 549. And so a lot of the faculty we're putting together a presentation. It's going to be acknowledged at the next reception, but there will be a presentation, and they will receive documentation of the note that their student has sent them. Some people didn't want to be recognized publicly, but those will still be referred back or sent back to the students from the FCT&L here. So I think that's one way. I think the teaching in itself, it's showing in the students, and these thank you letters, the outpouring of going from 100 to 500 and almost 550 thank you letters from students that did not have to do it. There was no incentive. There was no money tied to it at all. It was just they wanted to say thanks. And it's amazing the amount of appreciation students have with this information. Another way, you mentioned Randall Swain earlier. He reached out to me, and I don't know if you could, if you want to include this, you could include it on your course evaluations during that time span when you can ask specific questions if you wanted to gear it towards certain relationship rich strategies that you've incorporated in your course, and that's on your evaluations, which also gets reviewed. I don't know who is allowed to see those. Like Alex had said, maybe there's only a few people that see those. But that's another way that you can track that. And then of course the award ceremony. And Alex, I'll send you some information on that. Because we're compiling nominations, self-nominations now for the ceremony that happens during Scholars Weeks. So that's a really good way for public recognition as well.
Well, it looks like our group has dwindled, so we can close out. But thank you so much, Alex, for coming, and everyone will get a certificate. I should have said that earlier, right? But you'll take care of that, Cassie. All right.
Yep. So everyone will know when they watch the video later.
Yes.
Yeah, that's an acknowledgement right there. You can show your certificate.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Feel better soon.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.